Welcome. Oh, here he goes. Already starting.
Look at that. Look at that already.
What's the conspiracy?
Wow, there's a lot of them.
It's a nice hat.
It is
It's
a
fun.
nice hat. Look at that.
It's funny.
It's a funny big hat. Funny big hat. Funny
It's
hat.
funny. Big hat.
I just thought that would be appropriate after the week that we just had. Anyway, hi Nick.
What's up, Phil?
Not too much. Got a lot of
Welcome.
stuff happen this week. Welcome you. Welcome everybody.
Welcome, everybody. A lot of new
Welcome
stuff
Caleb.
today.
Caleb spelled welcome wrong.
He tries his best.
I don't know what to do with him. So anyway, how was your week?
I had a wonderful week.
Good. It was an interesting week. We had the Tournament of Champions this week. We had the NCAA basketball this week. Um,
I think the PBA had a bigger bracket than March Madness.
they had they had the extension ladder. It started Friday night, ended Sunday afternoon.
That was a marathon.
You know, I tell you what, and people, I mean, obviously agree, disagree. It was great having bowling on TV that
Finally.
much time. Finally, the problem I had was, is that the right tournament to bring in that format? You know
I
what I
mean,
mean?
yeah, that's a very historic event, and to try something completely new.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not a fan of a PTQ for a tournament of champions because it should have been the top 60 champions or top 48 champions or whatever you wanted to make it. Do you realize that 25% of the field made the step ladder?
Is that the number?
Yeah, there was 68 bowlers, 17 made it.
Mm-hmm.
And I called it a step ladder, extension ladder. I mean, they could have just showed the people that didn't make it.
I mean, it could be an extension ladder, or it could be just a bunch of normal ladders that are just duct taped together.
Yeah, it's true. They could have really, if they wanted to play like the March Madness, the bracket, they could have had four groups of eight. North, south, east, and west, something like that happened. But I think doing it at the Tournament of Champions, I think they could have been better off doing it another way.
I don't think you're a fan.
I'm not a fan of that, only because I'm maybe a purist when it comes to bowling. I like to have some things that are not, well, nostalgic is a word, but some heritage. I think about it. When I was younger bowling, they had a tour and they went to 32, 35, 38 cities. So that you can call a tour. How many cities do they go to now? You
Not
know,
32.
no. Is it 10
It might be around 10 to 12, yeah.
total? Right? And
Because
then they
well,
have like one week, the World Series has, I don't know, how many tournaments is that? Five? And you have in the same building.
mhm.
And the USBC has the Masters, the BPAA has the Open. So those two aren't even PBA events. They have the Tournament of Champions in Riviera, finally back to a place that's got heritage. I mean, you think about it. We used to have, you had Garden City Bowl, you had Maryland, and then you had Windsor Locks, and that's where the last guy on the bubble made his Firestone Tournament of Champions appearance, if he was going to make it. I don't know. I don't know how people feel about that. I agree. It did get a lot of, like somebody made comment, it gets a lot of bowling on TV. I agree 100%. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, you get a lot more people on the show, but at the very end of the day, you're still seeing the same three, four guys that are on every show, seems like.
Well, yeah, and then that's okay if they're the best. I mean, I have no problem with that.
Well, it's a format that lends
It's
itself
just,
to the best bowlers rising to the top with more games.
yeah, absolutely. You keep playing until you get the right guy that you want on the show.
I was always a big fan of the formats they were doing, I think in the mid 2000s,
Right.
where they would cut to top 32,
Yep.
and those 32 would go into match play,
Well, that that
bracket
was,
match play.
yeah. One bowl 32. That one.
Yes. and
Yeah,
then it
yeah,
kept
yeah.
going, or they'd have a bye or something to that effect. But
Right.
in a shorter match, we got to see a lot of different players. I mean, obviously, still the players that are the best are still going to show,
Sure.
but we got to see a lot of different players that come through because they catch a heater, or they
Right.
get the right breaks during a match.
Right.
In a
S-
best of five, best of
Yeah.
seven.
Yeah. So when they had that format, and I don't remember how they were seeded, 1 through 32. I forget exactly how it happened. But I had a conversation with Steve Miller one time, and I said, Steve, you realize I bowl league on Tuesday night. I'm going to bowl more games than somebody on tour bowls that tours for the whole year.
Yeah,
Because at the time, I think Walter Ray was number one. So Walter's bowling the guy in 32nd, a best of three or best of five.
yeah. No,
So that
no, I
guy gets to
wasn't.
bowl. Go ahead.
I wasn't a fan of World Series that they started doing that where they take only like the top 16
Yeah,
out
that's
of
when
a
they had
field
that.
of 120
Right.
something, and that was all that made the match
Yeah.
play portion. I thought
Right.
that was a bit excessive of a cut, and it was, you
Yeah, but
know,
that's when it had a cut, right? Wasn't there a time when it was you only bowled a couple of games for seeding, or you were seeded already? I don't remember the exact format, but I know I told Steve Miller that this guy's bowling 3 games a week, putting his bowling balls away, and then going to the next stop.
right.
He's not going to. And where does the guy even make a ball change during when you're getting blown out in the first game or blown out in the second game?
Hmm.
you know.
I
So
did.
I don't know. Maybe I just like to see the PBA do some of the things that um, the fans liked. And you got to admit this: it's an older sport in general, and the people that years ago, the demographics, they want them to be younger, but they're not that way yet. So I don't know. Maybe that having 1 or 2 tournaments a year where people could say, "I remember that," or that format would be a good idea. I'm not the commissioner. I'm not the owner. Um, but I'm like everybody else. I'm on Facebook, so I can say whatever the hell I want on Facebook,
You have the
and
right.
I have the right to do that, don't I? Whether
Yeah,
it's
you
correct
pay
or not.
you pay exactly $0 a month for that privilege
Exactly right.
to be able to voice your
Which I
opinion.
see every day on our Facebook page.
Now, what I
Um,
will say on the
yeah.
TOC shows was the
Hmm.
pattern looked absolutely brutal, and I have
Yeah.
never seen so many missed head pins to the right because there was a lot of
Unbelievable, right?
right.
I think they
Um,
said it was 22 times
it was in the mid 20s by the time it was all
that
said and
that the
done.
head pin was left after the first shot from
Right.
professional bowlers.
Yeah. And shout out to Chris Vi for taking out the 6'9" clean out of the rack.
Unbelievable. I've seen that happen in my
Uh,
entire life twice.
yeah. If Bob Vespi were around, he'd say trouble.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We
I've seen
have
that happen twice in my life where I was actually at a bowling center bowling when it happened. The first time it happened, and it's a friend of mine back in New York, Rich Tooker, and he threw a shot and he's a lefty, and he took out the 4-8, right?
nice.
Okay. And I said, Richie, I didn't see him throw the shot. I said, Rich, you better re-rack. He goes, re-rack for what? I said,
No, that was a
so
legit too.
yeah, that was a legit too.
Well, I want to
Yeah.
welcome everybody to episode 2 of the podcast. I see everybody chiming in. I even saw our friend Joey Pants in the
I told
chat.
Joey to tune in today. We had a surprise for him, so I'll get to that later. But
Yeah,
he and I talked a little bit yesterday.
we're going to touch on a lot of things today, where Phil
Yeah.
got his start in the bowling business, which will be up next. We're going to talk
Yep.
about some technology and some new launches, which I'm going to put up on the screen as a sneak peek real quick for everybody
Right.
to see.
Right?
In case you guys didn't know, we announced some new bowling balls here.
We did. We did. And this show is not only, like we said earlier and last week, it's not about Radical only. It's Radical will be mentioned from time to time. If we have new stuff, we'll talk about it. But
Yep.
we'll talk about the brands of Brunswick a little bit and some about the news in the industry, maybe some pet peeves of me or whoever else, and some of the topics people are writing in for us to discuss. And we'll try to do the best we can on a weekly basis, which could be pretty tough if we don't get a lot of suggestions from our fans that are tuning in. So, how about
Yeah.
comments? Anything about the bowling ball comments about the PBA?
People agree for the
Yeah.
more or less there. Let's get this set back up. So we'll talk about the new products here in a little bit.
Yep.
Someone said they could barely hear me, so turn my mic up a little bit for him. Hopefully that's a little better.
Yeah, yeah. I wish that was the case all the time, but I barely hear you. But not that's not the case today.
I think that's just
Uh,
something you need to see your doctor about.
Me barely hearing you? No, no, it's selective. I have a volume button that turns it down when you talk. So that's it.
How wonderful.
How wonderful. I don't know. So like I said, I think that there might have been a better week to try that format. Maybe they couldn't do it for TV purposes. At least we got it on TV and not streaming.
I just think if they had that many TV spots to fill with Fox and FS1,
Yeah,
why can't they televise more of these events?
it's true.
That's my question. Why? Why is everything on Bowl TV?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the Bowl TV finals. It looks like your bowling league, in a bowling center with a camera, and I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe I'm getting too old for this, and I'm getting grouchy.
You're just now asking yourself that
Yes, I am.
at the
Yes,
ripe old age of
70.
70.
I am. I am. I still write in pencil.
You're right. So,
I do.
okay, you're 70 years old.
Yep, I am.
Let's talk about the backstory of how you got into bowling. You went to college, born in Brooklyn.
So there I was. No, I did. I was a baseball player. Born in Brooklyn, went to Queens College, played baseball. Didn't bowl much. When I was, I think, 21, my dad asked me if I wanted to bowl in the league that he was in. He was one of the better bowlers in the league at the time, averaging around 190, which was fantastic in those days. And I joined the league, and I averaged 114. And by the end of the year, I got in the most improved. I averaged 130.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty good. I had fun. I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. Funny story. We'll have him on one week, Johnny. My dad was an engineer for the city of New York, and they used to meet at lunch, the engineers in that area, and they met for lunch at Maple Lanes in Brooklyn, and that was Petraglia's home house. So I would eat in lunch with my dad in the cafeteria in the lunch area, and had glass windows so you could see the lanes, and I used to watch Johnny practice. So it was pretty cool. So I knew him before I knew him.
Mm-hmm.
Then we became pretty good friends. So
he's a few years older than you.
He's a couple of years older,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. What is he? 100? I think
No.
he's 107 or something.
Nice. Yeah, he just fairly recently. He's been with Brunswick for over 50 years.
Oh my God, it's unbelievable, right?
The kind of
Yeah.
longevity and winning in every single decade he's ever competed in.
Right. Exactly.
That's insane.
I got to tell you a story about old. This is funny. So I was at a convention not long ago, a bunch of years, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and Salvino was doing a seminar, and I'm standing in the audience watching, just listening, and he made a comment about he was getting ready to bowl the Tournament of Champions when they had champions go bowl Tournament of Champions, and Carmen can bowl, and he was going practicing, and he said he's practicing for a couple of weeks, and then he says, I've been practicing in the afternoon, and these 2 old guys came up to tell me congratulations, and I stopped him. I said, "Old guys, you said they were old. What were they from? Ancient Egypt?" He thought they were old, but that was I guess Carmen. He might have been 80 something at the time.
Carmen
And the
used
other
to tell
guys
me
were
the
old.
Story of how he used to practice working on his finishing moves. He'd just set up a mirror. He'd bowl on the last lane in the house and have a mirror set up on the wall so that he could work on his finishing work.
Oh my God,
True
Carmen's
story.
the best. So anyway, so 1988. I'm working for Eaton Corporation. I'm a financial analyst, and I'm bowling locally a lot. I'm bowling well. So what happens is a guy that I bowled with comes into the bowling center one Thursday night. We had a classic league Thursday night. It was a late league, 9:15. So we would go to the coffee shop earlier, and the guys all meet there. We have coffee, hang out. And he walked in with a picture of a bowling ball made by Star Trek. And he said, "Look at this. What do you think? I said, well, that's a different looking core. At the time, the only really two-piece ball on the market was the hammer that was popular. And he brings in this ad from I guess it was Bowler's Journal. And he said, what do you think? I said, it looks pretty interesting. He said, I'll tell you what we'll do. I'm going to buy two of these, and you drill them, one for you, one because I was drilling balls in a pro shop by appointment only at the time. And I said, okay. He said, and if either one of us shoots an award score, the first one does, the other guy pays for them. I said, okay. So the following week he shows up with the balls, and I meet him up at the shop on Wednesday, and he says to me, because we bowled in two leagues, Wednesdays and Thursdays. So he says to me, can you drill this ball for me? I said, well, let me look at it. He goes, no, I want mine drilled right away. Here's the drilling instructions. So I follow the drill sheet. And I wait and I watch his ball roll, and then I wait and go back and look at the drill sheet, and I find out that the drill sheet's wrong. So I go and do a little analysis, working on some angles and stuff like that. And I drill mine. And the first game out of the box, I shoot 299.
What'd you leave?
I left a flat 7.
Ah.
You know what? I could have embellished the story and said I left a ring 7 or messenger, whatever.
Nobody would have believed it. It was already a little far fetched.
Yeah, right, exactly. So anyway, I leave flat 7, and I call up the company the next day and tell them that the drill sheet is wrong. Right?
Yeah.
So here I am. First of all, you got to think about that's pretty bold. It's not as bold as pretty bold as people what they do right now.
Asking
where
for staff.
Yeah, they ask for being on staff. They tell you about this. I mean, but it was pretty bold in those days to even call the company up. So the guy says to me, well, what's wrong with it? I said, wait a second. I'm not going to just tell you, right? I'm the one doing the work here. He said, well, I'll send you a couple of balls. I said, all right, whatever. So literally 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, I get a phone call from Paul Seagot, who owned the company, because Star Trek owed him money for the urethane they bought. So he ended up taking over the company. And he says, can you fly out to Ohio and, come and look at what I have and tell me what you think? And I said, all right. So she sends me airline tickets, and I go out to Ohio for a weekend. And I go into the warehouse, and all the bowling balls he's got there they're seconds. Every one of them in this guy's warehouse is second. It's got a 5-inch pin. It's got 5 ounces of top weight. It's got no inch pin, 0 and no top weight. And I said, you got terrible. This is terrible. He goes, well, this is what he sends me to sell. And I said, well, that's all he's making? He said, I don't know. So anyhow, he flies me back again a couple of weeks later. I go down to the factory with him by surprise. And we find out that the good balls are being shipped out of the back door of the factory. And the seconds are being sent to him to pay off his urethane bill.
So, here's some junk. Good luck.
Yeah, because the guy didn't know.
Yeah.
So he says to me, you want to come? You want to run this company? And I said, well, I have a financial background. That's what I do for a living, and I'm a bowler. It's been a pretty good combination. He said, I'll match your salary at Eaton and move you out here. So as a bowler, that was sort of a dream come true for me, because I got to work in the bowling business for the same salary I was making as a senior financial analyst at Eaton, and I got to do bowling. So I started that. I moved out there in September of '88
to Ohio.
Solon, Ohio. Yeah,
which is outside of where?
Outside of Cleveland. It's I think 22 miles east of Cleveland. Nice little area. It was great. Funny stories. I get there. I moved there in September. And at that point, everybody had starting their leagues, and I hook up in a league that's down in Akron at Colonial Lanes. And I go down there, and the first night I'm there, I bowl. I get in a league, and I shoot 279 one game, win a high game pot. And then I find out the owner of the lanes, or the manager, hated lefties. So that was the last time I saw any kind of shot in that house.
Against you?
No, I don't. It was just a new guy from New York, first day there, that type of thing. Anyway,
I agree with him.
Yeah. So, side story. So I'm there in October, and come the end of October, beginning of November, I'm at an apartment, and I'm going outside to go to my car in the garage, and a guy's putting 5.5 foot high snow stakes at the end of the driveway, and I had no idea what they were.
Yeah.
I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "These are snow stakes, so when we plow, we can see where the driveway is." And I said, "I understand, but why are they 5 foot tall?" He said, "You live in a snow belt." I had
You'll
no idea
see.
what snow belt was. You'll see. So literally, one of the nights I joined uh, a draft league, the Budweiser League of Masters, which is a draft league, and we went to, I think it was 18 different bowling centers.
Real nice.
Hold on, it's my son.
Mute.
I'm on the phone. Let me mute it.
Colonial Lanes is now an indoor flea market.
Do you know that? Oh,
Cowboy
how's that?
65.
There you go. Look at that. So, so anyway, I joined this Budweiser League of Masters, and we bowled everywhere. 18 centers. So we go down. One center we're bowling in is on the other side of Cleveland. It's on the west side of Cleveland. I live on the east side of Cleveland. Yorktown Lanes, still there. Mike Cottrell's place. Anyway, we bowl a night there. It's a Thursday night, late league. You bowled after their leagues were done, so you really bowled late. I come out and I got like 2 inches of snow on my car. The snow brush out, brush the car off. I drive home. I get 3/4 of the way home and the road's closed. So I have to get off the road and I go into a 7-Eleven and I'm sitting there and guy, what's going on? He said, well, the township starts here. You're no longer in the city limits. You have to wait for the plows. Sure enough, the plows come by about an hour later, and I go to my house, and I get near my house, and I was able to pull my car into a school that was down the end of the road, probably about a quarter mile from my house, and we had 32 inches of snow.
32?
32 inches of snow.
I mean, you tell me you didn't get that kind of snow in New York?
Never. With 30 at my house, it looked like it picked up all of the moisture over the lake and dumped it on my block. So that was my first experience with the with the snow belt. But anyway, so I'm in Ohio, and in '91, I moved there in '88. '91, I had closed the factory because I couldn't deal with the balls that were coming out of there.
The Star Trek factory. Okay.
Right. Started the track brand before that because the Star Trek brand had a bad name. Started the track and ran the factory for about a year, building good balls. I mean, we had it figured out.
What was your first ball?
The Enforcer.
Track Enforcer, first track ball. This was what year?
Got to be 80, 89, 90, around there, right? So we start selling them pretty well. And then I get a phone call from Columbia, down here, Columbia 300. And they're interested in making our bowling balls for us. So we had them start making them. And then that was 91. So 90, by the end of 91, they want to buy the company. So I talked to Paul Seagot, and we sell the company to Columbia. And part of the stipulation was I came down here to run the track brand for them. So I moved to San Antonio in 91 and have been here ever since December of 91.
Same office?
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's see. I started out across the street. We had two buildings, the main building for Columbia, and then they had a building across the street, and that was the track office. And then we had the fire and burnt everything down over here. And then they rebuilt everything. And then we put the lanes in across the street. We had the lanes in there before the fire, but the lanes were across the street, the test center. And then I moved into the main building here for a while. And then I left and started Dynathane with Bill Chrisman. We were partners. We did well with that. Brought in the 3G shoes, or they weren't called that. They were called Dynaroos.
Dynaroos.
Right. Brought them in.
Kangaroo leather.
kangaroo leather. It was fantastic shoes. And then and then David Herman, the Hermans owned Columbia, called me up and said, "Can you come back and work for the company?" I said, "Well, I didn't have a good time near the end with some of the management you had. There were certain things going on that I didn't think were good for the company or the business." And he said, "Well, I'm cleaning house, so I need you to come back and run the sales team." So I came back as vice president of sales for Columbia. And then about 2 years later, we sold all of the brands. Sold the Ebonite. His Track in Columbia and Dynathane. We still had Dynathane. So we sold that to Columbia. Sold that to Ebonite. And that's where the funny story starts. This is really interesting. And I was part of the team to decommission the plant.
In
So
Columbia.
in Columbia
Yeah.
plant, right? So what I did was we called up Ebonite and said, you guys bought everything, so tell me what you're taking. I'm assuming they're taking everything. They said, no, we don't want everything. We're just going to trash it, and you guys could sell whatever you don't want. Because they didn't want to deal with taking it out and moving the whole factory. So they took what they wanted. But I went through the factory with an orange spray can, and I put an E on everything they were taking. And I called up Storm and said to Bill, we were building balls for him. We were trying to. I said, anything you want? He said, yeah. And it came down and they put S's on everything else. So then there was a bunch of equipment that was still here. And I said, well, what are we going to do with that? So we spoke to Mr. Herman and said, hey, can we buy that from you? He said, absolutely. There's no rule. So I left that without any letters on it. So the funny story is Bob Reed came down to talk to all of the employees since Ebonite had bought the company, and there was some they were going to keep, take with them or not, whatever the deal was. And we get all done, and he says to me in the meeting room, I really don't have anything for you. And I said, I got my own plan. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And took
that
all
plan
of the,
was?
well, take all of the equipment that no one else wanted and put the factory back in the same exact spot. Literally 6
never
inches.
sold.
I had it. Yeah, but no, we cleaned it. I had other pieces to put in those places. When we reassembled the factory, it was about 6 inches shorter than it was at the end of the line. And then we hired the guy that built the lathes, and he built the 2 lathes for us. So we started 900 Global in the same exact spot where the Columbia factory was.
With the same equipment, more or less.
Oh, it was the same equipment.
Yeah.
It was just in different. We had 3 different factories. We had a 2 urethane plants and a polyester plant.
Mm-hmm.
So the finishing equipment, we moved from the polyester plant to the urethane plant. The pouring we took from one part and put in another. Whatever we had left, we built an entire factory in the same exact spot. So I was there for almost 2 years with Global, and then what happened was they were talking about moving, and I was running the sales team, and this ain't working out. So I decided to start my own brand. I started Radical, and Brent Perrier said to me, why don't you come out and talk to Brunswick a little bit? And I said, all right. So I flew out to Brunswick, up to Muskegon, and had a meeting with him. And I said, well, I committed to Global to build my balls for 6 months. Let's revisit it, down the road, and maybe we can do something. But I'm really not looking for a manufacturer. I'm looking for a partner in the business. I didn't want to just have manufacturing and then I had to worry about shipping and all of the details that go with that. And he said, well, no, we'll work something out, come back and visit. So I waited a little while, and then Brian called me up, Brian Graham, and said, hey, why don't we get together, have a conversation? And we did. And we ended up with a license agreement. I licensed the brand to Brunswick, and I run the brand. It worked out pretty well. And ironically enough, Brian worked for Columbia when I was there.
Right,
he was
back in the 90s, right?
I think it was 1947.
Wow. 47?
Yeah, it was in the 90s.
Nice.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I took Brian, we went on a trip together to the Far East. I think it was his first time out of the country, I think. Anyway, he saw it was quite the experience. And Brian was the first amateur staffer, probably in the country. I put him on track staff.
So speaking of track staff and going back to
Yeah,
even Dynathane and all that, it seems like
yeah,
you had your few pros that you always had signed, like Wayne Webb. You
yeah.
had pretty much Wayne Webb with track. You had him with Dynathane.
Right at Amaletto.
Amleto, you took him from Brunswick in the late '90s. I remember that
Yep.
when the
Yeah.
Tritons were hot.
Right.
But it seems
Yeah.
like you got your favorite pros. So who are your favorite pros back then, back in the heyday of the PBA of the '90s to work with when you were track? Who were your favorite guys?
Well, Amaletto was Wayne. Obviously, was with me forever. And it's similar to what you guys did at Brunswick with the Hall of Fame guy. You got that one guy that was seen by everybody. Wayne was that guy. Then we had Amaletto, definitely. Hoskins, we got
Mhm.
Steve Hoskins. He bought 300 on TV. He stayed with me for both companies, Dynathane and Track, and then Dynathane. Um, one of my favorite players, it was Dave DeAntremont.
Right. Yeah,
Dave
he
was
was. You see him
unbelievable.
almost every other week with a critical mass shirt on.
Unbelievable how good he was.
Yeah.
He had a lot of what Del Ballard had, where they got that hook rollout at the pocket, and nobody else had that at the time. And that was like key. And then reactive resin came out, and it sort of made everybody equal, somewhat. The guy who could barely get to the 5 was now blowing racks. So,
Right.
he was one of the favorites that I had. Jeff Lizzie, I love him to death, and Steve Wilson.
Steve Wilson, sure.
Yeah. But it's funny. We put together a staff based on the bowler's releases. You had high. Well, I call it the axis rotation. You had the guys that were like 75-degree rotation. Then you had guys at 45, and then I had guys at 15 or 20 degrees. And this way we always had somebody in play.
Right.
You know,
Well,
one of my
that's how you pick your team. That's how you draft.
yeah, exactly. That's how
your
you
all-star
draft players.
team.
Exactly
You want to get
right.
maximum coverage.
There
week
was
to
never
week.
a week we weren't in hunt. We had Bob Benoit on the team. He was really up the back of the ball and threw it slow. And he made shows with us like crazy.
Sure.
So, and one of the key years was the year of the Triton, the Heat. We went down to Sebring, Florida, and met with Kegel because they were taking over the lane patterns for the PBA tour that year. And we sat in a room, and John Davis said, "This is the pattern we're going to put out for the fall tour." I said, "You put out the same pattern every week?" He said, "Absolutely. We're going to let topography dictate who does well and who doesn't, because each center has different topography, which makes sense, right?
Sure. In theory.
In theory." So he gave me the picture of the pattern, and he said, "This is what we're going to put out. We put the same amount of oil. These are the runs, everything. It's fantastic." I went back to the hotel and called Billy Yinger up. He was working for me at the time. And I said, "Billy, you know that ball we're working on, the Heat?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, Go to R&D and tell them to up the load on mica in that ball. I think that's going to help us a little bit." So he went and uploaded the mica. And I told John, I said, "John, if you give me that pattern and you're not going to change it, I'm going to run you over." He said, "How could you say that? Every play's different." First of all, I had 9 guys on staff with all different releases.
Yeah.
Secondly, I had pretty good understanding about how balls rolled and what they did. So when I upped the mica, we went to the fall tour that year. And the first week was in Bradley Bowl, and we finished 6th. And then the next 6 weeks, we won.
6 in a row.
I think it was 6 in a row. The only time we lost on TV, the Heat, was to another Heat.
Hmm.
And then had the King of the Hill like 4 or 5 weeks in a row. I think it was 6. I might be wrong. It might be 5.
Yep.
But yeah,
Everyone had a Heat.
everybody did. Everybody did. Matter of fact, it was funny because down here in San Antonio, we have some mostly warm weather, but in November and December it starts to get cold, and that ball was being built like crazy. And they were coming out phased with a lot of white in them because of the temperature. And normally we would make them a second. People didn't care. They were buying them as soon as they came off the line, whether they were white, pink, they didn't care what color they were.
Ship it.
Just ship it. And it was unbelievable. We won every stop but one on the fall tour that year. you know.
That's
So
just your brilliance of adding that extra mica at the
well,
last minute.
here's the reason they
The
were putting a
technology.
launch pad in the front part of the lane,
Sure.
and they were starting to use a STP. As a matter of fact, with some of the stuff they were starting to put in the front part of the lane.
Makes
So I
sense.
needed a ball that would pick up in the right spot,
So that
and
so that
yeah,
technology helped the ball slow down in the front.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Dig in.
Dig in. That's it. And it worked for everybody on my staff. We didn't have one guy that couldn't use it,
Hmm.
And then what happened was we had, like I said, I think we had 9 guys. Paul Kohler was on our staff.
Yeah, he's in Florida now.
Yeah, he is.
Was he in
Um,
Florida then?
yeah.
Okay.
I think it was Stewart, Florida.
Yeah, he's
You know,
Hammer staff now. If I
yeah.
remember. Yeah,
Right.
he's
He
still
shot
putting up.
300 in one of the tournaments with our radical ball a couple of
Yeah,
months ago. So that was that's basically in a nutshell. Took about an hour for me to tell you that story, though, didn't it? That's
great
terrible.
story. Yeah, a lot of good
Yeah,
comments. Learning
yeah.
more about Phil and his history with bowling and how he
Mm.
weaseled his way into Star Trek by
I
telling them that
did.
they,
The drill sheets were wrong.
drill sheets are wrong, and look what it
Think
did.
about that. So here I am 33 years later, still doing it.
Yeah,
So it's a lot of fun.
interesting.
Let's talk about some new balls today.
Let's talk about technology. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
that's
kind
a
of
good
like your
idea.
segue right there.
I like
You
that.
talked about Micah
Uh-huh.
and how that revolutionized ball performance in the '90s.
It really did, right? And then from that became, particle balls were like
Particle.
crazy. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, since I came on board with Brunswick, I think it's like 11 years now. I think.
Yeah, 2013 was our first year
Yeah,
working together. So you must have
right.
met with BG and everybody in 2012.
I did. I did. Right.
Because I remember we were in Florida in Orlando at our
Yes,
sales
we
meeting
were.
in January
That's right. At Disney World Land.
at the
Whatever.
the boardwalk, I think it was,
Yes.
and that's where the news was dropped to us. Like, hey, guess what, guys?
Yeah.
We're going to be working with Radical. I remember seeing you at a year prior, probably at Astros Super Bowl, doing a demo in
Yeah.
Texas. I flew out to Texas to help Robert Lawrence do a demo, and I saw you there sitting there with your table, and you had your your early releases and stuff like that. You're on your
That's right.
phone or your e-reader or whatever you had. I think it
I'm
might
gonna
have been a
stab you with this pencil if you keep it.
BlackBerry or
A pigeon. I had a pigeon.
what are
I
those
said,
old? Not like the. It's basically like a notebook, but it's whatever a Rolodex, but electronic.
we were doing well today until now. So don't press your luck.
I couldn't stop.
I know. Yeah, I know. We were
I
going
have
along so smoothly, and then this. Um, so we came on board a long time ago. It feels like. Anyway, one of the first things that Mo brought to the table, we kept talking about the impact of putting holes in a ball. It's more important, and I think it's the most important thing of a core. You get a core shape, and then when you put holes in it, that shape changes, and therefore, well, not everybody knows that, but it's such a huge impact on performance where you put the holes, how deep you put them, and everything. So we came out with scoop technology,
Mhm.
and that was unique for Brunswick at the time. We had never had that, and it was very successful for us. Um,
No, Brunswick shapes are always geometric, very
yeah,
geometric shaped,
correct.
functional, but nothing of that sort.
No, and that was sort of huge for us because we had the Yeti and a couple other balls, came out, and scoop technology was, and the big band around the belly of the ball where the thumb goes. So it was key because we knew it was going to blow up the intermediate diff or the total diff, and we were going to create something nobody else had. We got very successful in a hurry. But you look at that as part of the technology that we came out of the Brunswick family, the R&D team. And then with the acquisition of Ebonite, we became so much more advanced. We took all of our knowledge and technology and combined it with, the Ebonite guys. Rich Hansen came on board,
Yep.
and Randy Tytloff
Yeah,
came
that
on
was
board.
November 2019.
Right, and I know Rich from down here in San Antonio when he had his pro shop here. Randy, I didn't know that well. I mean, I knew Randy to say hello, and that was it. But those two guys brought a plethora of knowledge to the team. As plus now with Brunswick, they had the cash behind them, where maybe Ebonite didn't have it at the time, to allow us to try crazy things. Everything in this industry that is successful, a lot of it comes from serendipity. I mean, the bleeder, the guy in the back, and I'll tell that story some other time, made the bleeder by mistake. Steve Cooper with the reactive resin ball, that came by an additive they put in the factory to ship it to him because the balls were having problems with the temperature. So they gave him that additive. Now, next thing you know, he's got a reactive resin ball. It creates a whole new industry, right? So, when you bring Randy on board with Rich and the knowledge is just incredible. Then they made dot technology. We had to solve another problem. They were having cracking issues when you drilled near the pin. Okay, so we have dot technology. Dynamicore, increasing the coefficient of restitution in a bowling ball. I talked to Billy about that a long time ago, how we did it at Columbia, not knowing we were doing it, but we made the outer core to have the same specific gravity as the inner core, having the same specific gravity as the outer core. And we had conversations like that. So we end up with Dynamicore. HK22.
That's the latest and greatest.
Oh my God, it's unbelievable. It's a whole new generation of resin. It doesn't cure the same. It's a different category.
Yeah. And it's clear.
And it's clear, right? So it looks nicer on the shelf, right? We never had here one name for any brands across the brand that we use.
No,
we always
kept
autonomy. We never shared. At Columbia, we did. When I was there, it was one of the key things we did was with Flexel and Superflex. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was on everything.
Yeah.
It was on every ball because the stuff was fantastic. BASF found it. One of the advantages we have at Brunswick that none of the other companies have is the chemistry that we don't buy it from a blender.
No.
The other companies buy their resin from a blender. It comes preset. You mix it 1-to-1. And where they get in trouble, these other companies get in trouble, is when they try to create different performances from the limited range that the resin that they was set. So they start making the ratio different. Instead of 1-to-1, they go 1.5 to 95. Well, at some point you stretch it to the point where it becomes brittle and it'll crack. Or you try to get so much hook out of it that you make the ball too soft. So, these are things that companies run into. We ran into them at Columbia doing the same thing, fiddling around. But the advantage we have at Brunswick is we have chemists, we have chemistry people, we have chemists doing it. We're not relying on the blender, a urethane blender to buy commodity product. We get formulas in that we design. And they come up with HK22 is fantastic. So this is sort of a segue into the next generation of technology. I have been in this industry 33 years, and I've been involved with a lot of different companies. Basically, I just can't hold a job.
Basically, all of them.
Yeah, I just can't hold a job. I think that's all it is. And this is the most advanced I've ever seen a company. And the quality is unbelievable. We don't have any problems. I remember going through container loads of balls that came out bad in the factory. Brian and I sit down sometimes when I'm in town or when we're out together and tell stories to each other about, remember when that happened? Remember when this happened? It was unbelievable. It was a catastrophic.
And it wasn't even that long ago.
No, it was not.
As short back as at the Ebonite plant, they were having same scrap issues.
Absolutely.
On their line.
Absolutely. I remember down here at Columbia, we'd have containers of balls that we couldn't ship. Yeah, we had to scrap them.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. We don't have that problem. The technology is fantastic. This is the most technological company I've ever been around. And they listen. I'll make a suggestion sometimes because I do know some things, and we'll find out if it'll work or not. I mean, it's really cool. We have great relationships. I'm the happiest I've ever been in the bowling industry right now. Unfortunately, I get to work with you, and that sort of puts a damper on a lot of stuff.
I tend to think that I add to your happiness.
Yeah, well,
especially I think you say like the last 10 years of this industry has been the best to you as it's ever been.
Yeah.
And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I've been with you that entire 10 years, so there's a direct correlation.
It's going to be you. I got you.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about some new balls that are coming out. You'll have to help me with a lot of this because I'm not at that. I don't get involved with every ball that comes out of that factory.
Yeah, we're not going to go into super great
Yeah,
detail. You'll help me out. You got all the specs with me right
yeah, I
there.
do, I do, I do, I do.
Let me bring up on screen here.
All right. So we have three of them. The Tundra Fire from Track, correct?
Yep.
Yes. Yep. The Kinetic Cobalt from Track,
Yep.
and then DVH Troublemaker. So just talk about the Tundra Fire. It's a medium light oil. It's the HK22 cover, which I'm telling you, people that are listening in, this is the industry standard on when it comes to cover stock. It's unbelievable. I went back and started testing older balls, older core balls with this cover, and they become a new product. It's not even close. It's just unbelievable. It's pearl. It's got dynamic core. It's ideal for medium to lighter oil. 2.56 and 030 differential. So it's a low diff ball.
Yep. Higher
Yeah.
RG,
Higher RG,
low
low
diff.
diff
I,
ball.
I actually tested this one, did my review over the weekend.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a ball that for people that bowl on house shots with a lot of friction,
Mm-hmm.
this is going to be a ball that they can stay with the entire night.
Right.
I've never heard, I mean, if anybody who's shot a big number, 800 plus, never have you ever heard them say, "Oh yeah, I made 3 ball changes. I changed 3
Yeah.
zones and I shot
Same.
840."
Right. Exactly.
No, I moved 2 boards all night
Yeah.
and just changed something minor. Never
Mhm.
got out of this ball.
Right.
That's what you hear. This is going to be a ball for when you bowl on high friction or bowlers that have lower ball speed, that have trouble getting it down the lane. Higher RG, lower diff.
Hey,
That
maybe I
tracks.
should get one.
You should. I mean, maybe you can talk to BG about maybe taking over Track Brand again, be like a reunite, advisor. Sorry, an advisor. You get your hands full with Radical.
Can I get on staff with Track
If you double in the 10th
to win the U.S. Open?
to
How about
win
a
the
handicap tournament on the weekend?
yeah, I was gonna say the Radical Majors. If you double in the 10th to win the Radical Majors All
No.
Stars
Wait,
League,
that's too much. How about if I double in a tent tonight to win a point?
I'll get you an advisory staff deal.
I'll pay for it if it'll work for me.
All right, I'll get you a good deal.
All
We'll
right,
we'll send you
appreciate it.
all the balls that Star Trek made.
Yeah, right. Oh my God, please. So the Kinetic Cobalt is next. Medium oil ball. HK22 hybrid. Now I know a little bit about the HK22 hybrid cover stock. We had it on the Bigfoot hybrid. It's fantastic.
Right.
It is just
Different
clean.
different additive
different,
package with this
different
one.
additive package, right? Yeah, absolutely. But the base hybrid is really cool. It's cleaner than our normal hybrids are with the HK22, but it's got enough pickup in the back when it hits the friction, so it's really cool. Dynamic core as well, 12 to 16 pounds. You know what I didn't do, Nick? I didn't write down the numbers on this one. I'm sorry.
It's 006 intermediate. Believe it's 040. I'm going off memory here.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, the shuttle core is barely asymmetric at 0.006, I believe.
Right.
So easy length, not a ton of flares, right in the mid range. It kind of bridges the gap between your stronger ASIMs and your regular symmetrical balls.
Yeah.
But the colors are great. The ball rolls great. We had Ryan Schaefer in. I think the video is posted at this point on our YouTube and Facebook track pages. So that ball is launched. It'll be coming out on the 20th of April.
Fantastic. And now this next ball, it's coming out. It's pretty interesting. I was really excited to see this come out of the plant. And I asked Joey Pence just to be on the call because this ball is made in honor of him. The Troublemaker has what we call a dualistic core. It's got finger scoops in it, and it's designed with the two-handed bowler in mind. I didn't think it would ever come to that, but you know what? We're the first.
First.
And I tell you what, I think we're going to have to do something to prevent anybody from stealing this technology. But it is a core designed for two-handed bowlers. And the cool thing about it is a deep finger scoop on top. So when you drill into it, where the center of your grip is basically between your two fingers, you drill at least 2.5 inches deep, and it enhances the roll, and your options are greater.
Yep.
for
We'll,
a two-handed bowler.
we'll go into
Go ahead.
some of the details, and I actually have a
Yeah,
couple of cores here to show everybody.
well, that's pretty
I'm going
cool.
to pull myself on the main screen here. So
Yeah,
first, I
sure.
want to
Skill
bring up a
alignment.
core that is very popular in the Deviate line. This is the Verge core, damn good Verge, Verge solid. So that is the size of this core, and you can see the shape of it. Now this, for reference, I don't want to drop it.
Does that even fit in the ball?
It does. It sticks out
Okay.
about 2 inches. No, just
Yeah,
kidding.
that's all right. That helps you with the 10 pin. Oh, look
But
at the
you can
top.
just, yeah,
Yeah.
this is the biggest core that any of the brands have ever made. I'll show you the scoop technology there. So what's going to be most important, and we'll talk on DV8. There's going to be a whole series of videos, about 8 long, that are going to be talking about the technology of the core, all the drilling, go into all the details, and a new way to lay out these bowling balls to create the most performance possible for bowlers that don't use their thumbs. So I'm going to put up another slide here of what we did with Throwbot, because we also did testing with this with Throwbot. And as you can see, we have 5 layouts and with all the numbers that go. And the most important aspect of this drilling now is these are all 5-inch pin or dot to PAP. But the important factor here is the dot to the center of grip. So you'll see you got a 1.5, a 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, and 5.5 on the layouts there. And we color coded them with different grip colors there, so it'll be easy to spot on Throwbot. But you can see the differential on this ball, which is a symmetrical ball. Mind you, from the start, it is symmetrical, but because you're going to be drilling through that massive band, which is very close to the shell of the ball where you'll be drilling for a two-hander, you're either going to take a ton of mass away or you're not. So the 1.5-inch dot to COG with a 5-inch pin lowers the differential from 045 to 035 and brings the intermediate up just a few points. Now, for a 5.5-inch dot to COG, you're going to be raising that all the way up to 058 from 045. So there's 23 points of difference. And you're also taking that intermediate almost up to 020 with 018.
That becomes pretty much an asymmetrical ball at that point.
Right? You can make this ball either symmetric
Yeah.
by going closer with the pin to the center of your grip, which is for 2 fingers, is right between the center of the fingers there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all because of the mass you're either going to be taking out from the belly
Right.
and not in the gap there. So
Yeah, we had the top of the fixed core looked similar to that when we built that with the belly and the belly was down more in the middle of the ball, and the finger scoop was at top like that.
And another thing that we have never done, but we've actually, this is the 12 and 13 pound version, smaller, slimmed down, but to give the youth bowlers and people that use lighter weights in 12 and 13 the opportunity to experience that same technology.
So the 80-year-old two-handed bowler can buy a 12-pound ball and it'll work. Is that what you're saying?
Well, if you want to start working on it, you got about 10 years to be that 80-year-old bowler.
That's perfect for the kids that are coming up, obviously.
Sure.
Yeah, but see, I mean, this is technology that's fantastic. It's unbelievable, what we're doing. And again, it uses a insider cover, which is smoother and more predictable because you don't really want monster skid flip for a two-hander. They have enough trouble controlling it sometimes. Joey Pants is complaining that it's discrimination.
That's discrimination. What about thumbers? We were being oppressed. I got to tell you this.
Yeah.
Okay, I tested this ball over the weekend and did my review, and it'll be posted soon. But I've never sent more messengers and pins across the deck with fury than I ever have with this ball.
And you drilled it with all your fingers in it?
I drilled my thumb and everything in it, yes.
All right, good. Well, no, yeah. Let me get to that real quick before we go and people think it's only a two-handed ball. It is not. It's got the technology. Obviously, there's a belly on it. It's got the technology so you could drill into it as you normally would and make it work as well for a three-fingered bowler. One-hander,
Mm-hmm.
three fingers.
It was designed specifically with two-handers and people that don't use their thumbs, but
Right.
for a normal bowler that uses his thumb, I wouldn't call Joey Pants normal by any means, but
No, not at all.
bowlers that use their thumb, this becomes a very strong rolling symmetric ball.
Correct. So I think that you have to understand it's targeting the performance that we're getting from the new current bowlers now with the two hand, but also the young kids. I love that idea. It's down to 12 pounds, and the kid is going to get some ball motion that he may not normally get by drilling a symmetrical ball with two hands for two hander.
Right, and with the trend on tour, with everybody going down to 14 pounds, it's only a matter of time before they start asking for 13s and 12s, right? Amazing, right?
Yeah, I'm a trendsetter. I went to 14s a couple of years ago. I guess the tour guys are finally catching up.
They finally copied you. They're like, hey, what's Phil throwing?
Yeah. What's Phil doing?
What's Phil doing?
Exactly. So I think that's that's a lot today we covered. A lot of people watching, Nick, today.
Yeah, we got 150 today.
Oh, it went up. Word is out. The word is out now. How popular we are.
Mm-hmm.
We look at everything you guys write in. If you have some topics that you'd like for us to discuss, we'll try to get them out here and talk about them next week. I'd like to get into next week, maybe talk about urethane, the impact it's having on the game today, since I've lived through rubber, plastic, urethane,
epoxy.
My God.
Yeah.
Epoxy, and then urethane again, and then resin again, and then HK22. So we can talk about that. Anybody have any questions that we should try to touch on real quick?
We haven't seen a ton of questions. We had people that are kind of talking about like Wes Bowman brought up the EPX. Can you guys talk about 300 EPX? And that was after your time, I believe, at the.
It was right there, and I came back for it to get. I ended up being the guy that sold them all.
Oh no!
After they couldn't.
You were the one.
I left, and then came back, and found out we had a warehouse full of them that they couldn't move, so I sold them all.
Yeah, I remember when, at the time, Brian Alpert was my sales rep in my pro shop. Mm-hmm. And he came by with that ball and was showing it off, and he did the little pinprick on it with the, and then it started oozing.
It's amazing.
The ball.
Yeah, but it wasn't every one of them. So do I have a minute to tell you a little bit about it, or we want to cut it off?
No, we're good. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Carmen Salvino brings this technology to us, and it was fantastic technology. I'm telling you, it was great. The problem was, in the factory system, the way it was set up, we couldn't build it. Here's why. The molds got hot. So the first 100 you poured were fantastic. I'm telling you, it was the greatest thing since sliced bread at the time, right? It was brand new technology.
Why is sliced bread so great anyway?
Because it's great. Because what would you have if you didn't? You have to cut regular loaves of bread. Sliced bread, it came sliced, you make a sandwich.
You got to cut your own bread? Is that how you do it back in Brooklyn?
Yeah, you had to cut your own bread.
Oh, so let me break up my little tiny violin.
I'm telling you, I'm going to sharpen this pencil. If you keep it up, I'm going to go sharpen the pencil.
Going. Talk about the bread.
So the ball was great. And here's what happened. We'd make a batch and send them out for testing and get rave reviews. 400 of them. Make another batch, send them out for testing, get rave reviews. We had cats on our lane system. It outperformed everything we were making. 100 of them at a time, right? When you got into production, what happened was, you poured 500 or 1,000 at a time, the molds would get too hot and it wouldn't kick the catalyst the right way. So that's why it oozed. It didn't have the chemical interlocking.
So you're saying the ones that oozed were not optimal?
No, they were not.
Okay.
And that's what happened. The other ones, the first 100 from that batch were fantastic. But when you built 500 of them or 1,000, then you ended up with the molds getting so hot that the balls didn't kick to harden the right way. Okay. Now, weren't soft. They just didn't have the cross links that you need chemically. So the way you don't know that, because the way we built balls down here, and still do, is we build a batch maybe of 30 balls. You check top weights, you check pin placements, distances, stuff like that. Then you make a run of 100 to make sure that the ball is performed properly. You have them seated out. Then you go into production. You might make 1,000. Well, we did the same thing. We poured 100, poured 100 again, then we poured 1,000. And while they're in the factory curing, we poured another 2,000.
Bada
And
bing,
while they're in
bada
the
boom,
factory,
2,000.
yeah, next thing you know, we got 5,000 of them, and
And they're
100
bad.
were good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the technology was great, but we didn't have the equipment to build it the way it had to be built for that technology.
Did you try putting like a nice fan on the?
Yeah, we had the fans you hold with the little battery. Each guy was
Yeah.
holding one next to the
Yeah, as they go
big cooler.
by, you know, just
Yeah,
like,
yeah. So that was what the EPX was a great. Carmen had a great idea with it. We just couldn't do it, you know, because we'd have to rebuild the factory. We'd have to have all new technology to build it.
So we've talked a lot about production and all the different things, and we actually got a couple of questions I'm going to pop up here.
Okay.
First one's from Joe here. Are sellers required to state or list if the ball is first or second quality? Do they all get stamped on the box before they leave the factory?
They do, and we usually don't let them leave the factory unless they're sold in a group of seconds, for instance. I don't know. I hate to say this, but you know, I've only been with you guys 11 years, so I should know this by now. I don't know if we put an X on them or I don't know what we do.
I've never seen this factory second, so I don't know.
Yeah, we have them. They're called Frozens.
Frozen, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's usually when I was a sales rep, you know, we used Frozens we drilled demo balls from Frozen.
Absolutely right, exactly.
Because it would usually be something like porosity, like a few air bubbles in the shell,
Right.
something
It was cosmetic,
cosmetic.
Right? Yeah.
Or you know, we have I think it was like the CG would be out 1 5/8, more than 1 5/8 on an asymmetrical ball from the center line,
right?
And so we'd kick those into Frozen as well.
Yeah.
But now it's I don't
even know, but we have to mark them, and they sell them that way. They're marked as seconds, whether it's a letter or a symbol.
You just got to hope that the seller has the integrity and their reputation is good. So don't just go buying from any rando on Facebook.
Yeah, I don't know how he would have got them unless he bought them from somebody. So,
people, it's the internet, man.
The internet.
There's a market for everything.
Yeah, right.
We got one more question, and it has to do with HK22.
Okay.
Kenny wants to know, why does HK22 smell like fuel?
It's rocket fuel, man. Rocket fuel.
Rocket fuel.
It's just a chemical makeup. You know, some people like fuel smell. I don't like my trunk smelling like Cocoa Puffs. So
or Cinnabon.
Or Cinnabon or whatever.
I prefer Cinnabon, but yeah, that's different. I'll actually want to eat those.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? We are trying to use different additives, maybe don't have as strong an odor initially. But I'll tell you what, you know, I get the balls here quicker than anybody else gets them because I'm actually a driver 8-iron from the factory. So it seems if they pour my ball on Wednesday, I'll have the ball here on Monday.
Your driver 8-iron from the factory. That's hilarious.
And after a day or two, it's the smell starts to dissipate, and usually by a week or so, it's gone. You know, you got to be.
Usually, when you get that chemical smell, it does dissipate over time. Some people are more sensitive to it.
Sure.
I know that if I smell like that chemical, I know that ball's going to be a good one. That ball's going to be ripping on the back end.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'll get balls here a day or two after they're poured. And a lot of times the UPS guy will put them right in front here, and my car's parked right next to the office. I'll put them right in the trunk, and I open up that trunk door if they first got in there. And you know, it's pretty potent. But you know, by the second, third day, it's gone. Either that or my nose just fried from the smell. I don't know. I don't think that's it though.
I got a couple of questions that keep pouring in on people are really interested about this stuff.
We got time.
We got Cowboy back here again. He says, are long pins and out-of-line CGs really just as good?
Absolutely. It doesn't matter. When USB-C made that
3-ounce rule.
3-ounce rule, yeah, and no extra hole, you know, it doesn't matter. The problem before was, you know, if the pin was 5 inches out and you had too much top weight in it, you couldn't kick it out because you'd end up having to put a
Yeah.
weight hole in it. Now you don't, now it's not an issue any longer.
No.
Yeah, and they're just as good. Doesn't matter.
Even
Hmm.
prior to the rule, I would seek out 4 to 5 inch pins for myself.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah,
even back then, I wanted 20-degree VALs and getting the pin way up above my fingers,
right.
and without using an extra hole. So that was the only way really to do it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Bob Gardetto wants to know, for test balls or balls that don't make production, how do you scrap them? Do they get recycled somehow?
I don't know if they actually get recycled. Um, I know when I'm done with them, I put a big hole in them, put them in a dumpster,
Yeah.
and they make them landfill somewhere. You know,
Yeah, there was actually a funny story here locally in Muskegon
I saw
where a guy
that.
was renovating his stairs to the basement or something to that effect. But in a crawl
Yeah.
space, he found 100 Brunswick rubber bowling balls from like the 50s or 60s era.
Hmm.
And he made the news channels and everything like that. Very funny story.
I think he
Uh,
was ripping out his back porch, which
mhm,
was cement, and they were used to fill in below the cement.
right.
If I recall, that's what it was.
Great
You
filler.
know, oh, it was a lot. Yeah, my dad used to, when I lived in New York. My dad used to take my bowling balls and bury them in the backyard.
There you go. Yeah, I see people use them as like lawn decorations. They
Yeah,
uh,
we
they
didn't
they
do
line their
that.
gardens.
Yeah, but he buried them. It's like he'd be digging up an area, needed some topsoil somewhere else, and fill a hole back in with my bowling balls.
Hmm.
I'm not sure that maybe we should dump them in the ocean. I think once they're cured. They're cured. Make reefs out of them.
Wow.
You know.
Terrible idea.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Let's not do
Well, Phil,
that.
that was a great show.
It really was. I enjoyed it today. Not that I didn't enjoy the last one.
Sure. Just not
Next
as
week,
much.
not as much. Next week, I definitely want to talk a little bit about urethane
Yeah. I'm going to talk about the
because
Masters too.
the Masters is coming up. I have people asking some questions about it.
Golf or bowling?
What I am going to try to do between now and then is I'll make some phone calls out to the Nationals,
Mm-hmm.
the booth, just see an idea what's going on. And maybe in a week or so, we'll get Bobby Brust on the show.
Yeah, maybe you can get a report from
Yeah,
Reno.
I'll try to get a Reno report, and then maybe in 2 or 3 weeks, we'll get Bobby Brust. He runs the Hammer booth, or the Brunswick booth, we call it now for us. Drills all the balls out there, is in charge of that. So maybe we'll get him to give us a little feedback. We'll have him on the show. And any other topics you guys write in, if we pick some out, if we could help answer some questions. Again, we're trying to make this an information network, so to speak, rather than just dry run stuff and boring. We try to keep it a little exciting.
Try.
Yeah.
So we're looking for current events. We're always got our finger on the pulse of the bowling industry.
Yeah,
And we'll talk about non-bowling stuff from time to time with the NCAA bracket.
that's right.
I might want to add that Phil, who spends his life watching college basketball, is a terrible picker.
How could you say that? We're 3 points out of first.
4 points out of first? You might as well.
Sorry,
they
4
might
points
as
out
well-
of first.
They might as well be in another zip code.
4 points out of first with half the tournament to go, and we have a lot of our teams alive. How on earth can you say that?
I said
Oh,
it.
oh, by the way, let me
'Cause I
just
have
bring
the
this up
internet.
real quick. Do you remember last week how much abuse I got that I couldn't figure out how to use the microphone and Shipyard or Streamship or whatever it's called? And I got abused how it took 2 hours to get me to set up a microphone. And tell
3.
Nick, just give him a quick synopsis of who was ready today and who was not.
You were ready, and the only reason you were ready
There's no reason. I was ready.
because you didn't touch any of your setup.
Well,
You didn't
you're
even like,
right.
turn
I
your
left it
computer
plugged.
off.
I didn't turn anything off for a week.
You,
You, on the other hand, here's my day. Testing. You have echo.
You were
You have
afraid to
echo.
breathe
He
on your
sounds
system over there.
He sounded like Bob Shepard at Yankee Stadium announcing the next batter with the echoes. Oh, and by the way, when I bring this camera in, this doesn't work. I'm sitting here going, you know what?
I have multiple cameras here.
I
You should see my
got
setup
it.
here. To
No,
look so
no,
professional, it is
no,
utter
I don't know.
chaos.
Here's my setup right here. See, that's it.
Yeah,
That's
it's great.
it. Yeah, I got that, and I won't disconnect my microphone for another
Yeah,
week.
You're gonna leave it alone for another week.
I'll go put it on another table, and that's it.
Why don't
So-
you put a paper bag over it just in case you actually bump it?
It's a good. Wait, I could do this.
Oh, there you go. Oh,
That's not
nice. Yeah, now we're gonna get feedback, and everybody's mics just exploded in their ears. Great.
Hey, Nick, thanks again. You did a great job today, and everybody that tuned in, all 25 of you.
We had 150 plus, so
That's
we had
beautiful,
a
isn't
great
it?
show. Thanks for everybody for tuning in.
And
You
we'll
know,
talk. We'll have
we
some more
read all your
topics.
comments. We we'll take them into consideration when we start doing more shows. And
We
tune
will.
in next week.
We will. Same time, same bat
same
channel.
day.
Same bat channel.
That's right. You guys enjoy the rest of your week.
We'll see you guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.